Hello everyone. Bulk data is never useful unless and until it is presented in a simplified manner. And what better than graphical presentation of data? So hello all, today we are here with a module on graphical representation of data. Let's quickly go through the overview of this module. We're going to discuss about what is graphical representation and what is the purpose of the graphical representation of data. Then we'll talk about certain basic types of graphical representation, that is what are the different types of charts and the diagrams that we use for graphical representation of data. They are the pie chart, bar graphs, the statistical maps, the histogram, statistics in practice. Here we are going to see what are the most common methods in which you can use the graphs in order to bring statistics in practice. Then we'll go on to explain the frequency polygon, and lastly we'll discuss about the time series charts. Let's quickly understand what is the meaning of graphical presentation of data. A graphical representation is a visual display of the data as well as the statistical results. It is more often and effective than presenting data in the tabular forms. There are different types of graphical tools available for presentation of data depending upon the nature of the data that you are presenting as well as the statistical results. What is the purpose of graphical representation now? First and foremost, we require graphical presentation to compare the categorical data in a simplified manner. Secondly, we can compare the series of the data over time. Time series analysis is the best way of doing a comparison of a variable over a period of time. Percentage of total comparison can be known with the help of graphs such as pie charts. Relationship between two variables can be explained at a glance looking at the graphs. And lastly, it can be used for establishing a relationship between two or more variables just at a glance. Now let's discuss a few basic types of graphical presentations. There are many types of graphical presentation, but the most commonly used ones are the circle or the pie diagram, the bar diagram, comparative bar diagrams, histogram, frequency polygon, and cumulative frequency polygon, or commonly known as ogive. Let's talk about the circle or the pie diagram. Now a pie diagram or a pie chart displays data as the percentage of the whole. Each pie section should have a label and a percentage. A total data number should be included. So this is an example of a pie diagram. This is a representation of the number of students in each subject. So here this entire pie stands for 100, and out of that the numbers have been displayed according to the percentage of the total pie. Now let's take a quick example and see what is the utility of the pie chart. A pie chart, or we can say a pie graph, showing the differences in frequency or percentages among the categories of nominal or the ordinal variables. The categories are displayed as the segments of the circle whose pieces add up to the 100% of the total frequencies. So here is a pie chart wherein we have made too many categories, right? And this is annual estimate of US population of 65 years over by race. Now here we are representing the total American population according to the races, right? But then certain times too many categories in a pie chart can become too messy. So therefore, it is always advisable to reduce the number of categories that are displayed in the pie chart. This is a more simplified version of the pie chart. We have reduced the number of categories wherein it becomes easier to display these categories with the help of the percentage analysis. So therefore, it is always advisable to reduce and club the number of categories while representing the data with the help of a pie chart. Now let's see what are the basic advantages and disadvantages of using a pie chart for data representation. First one, it becomes very visually appealing. Secondly, it summarizes a large set of data into a visual form. Thirdly, it is visually simpler than other types of graphs. And lastly, it shows the percentage of the total for each of the categories. There are certain disadvantages as well. So what are the disadvantages of the pie chart? no exact numerical data, we are only doing a percentage analysis, then it is hard to compare two data sets. Third, total unknown unless specified. So therefore, there are certain cases in which the pie diagrams does not give you the total number as well as the calculation. The data tables are not there. So therefore, it becomes difficult to identify the total number which is represented in a pie diagram. And lastly, it can be used only with the discrete data. That means the data which has certain frequencies attached to it. So next in line is the bar graph. Bar graphs are commonly used to show the number and the proportion of a nominal or the ordinal data which possesses a particular attribute. They depict the frequency of each category of data point as a bar rising vertically from the horizontal line. So this is an example of the bar diagram that you can see. Here, MA Psychology students' result is displayed. So therefore, these are the categories in which we have put the result, and this is the representation according to the color scheme. So this tabular form now gets converted into a graphical form. Let's take a quick example and understand bar graph better. We are comparing the living arrangements and the labor force participation of the elderly. Now a graph showing the differences in the frequencies or the percentage among categories of nominal or ordinal variable is a bar graph. The categories are displayed as the rectangles of equal width with their height proportional to the frequency or the percentages of the categories. So this is another example wherein the categories of the people is shown as whether they are living alone, whether they are married, or any other category. So therefore, these you can see these are all rectangles of equal width with the help of which we are representing the data. This is a comparative bar diagram wherein we have also taken the males and the females as another category. So therefore, we are clubbing these categories to display here along with whether their status of living arrangement is whether they are living alone, whether they are married, and others. So this represents the females in this particular living arrangement, and this represents the males which are living in that particular living arrangement. This is an example of a comparative bar graph. So here you can see divisions have been mentioned, that who scored division 1, second division, third division, failed, and in the others category. So these are the categories, and these are the number of boys, and this is the number of girls. So therefore, the comparison of variables also become easier when you are doing it with the help of a comparative bar graph. Let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages. Again, it is very visually appealing and very strong. Bar graphs display discrete data in separate columns, unlike the pie diagram. Estimates key values just at a glance, summarizes the large data sets into a visual form, and permits a visual check of accuracy as well. The disadvantages related to the bar diagrams are: graph categories can be reordered to emphasize certain effects, requires additional written or verbal explanation. So therefore, there has to be certain written explanation below the bar diagram in order to understand that what kind of a data has been represented and what are the categories that have been represented in the bar diagram. Next, it can be easily manipulated as well as it can create false impressions as well. And lastly, be inadequate to describe attributes or behaviors. The next category is that of the statistical map. Usually, the statistical maps are used to represent the geographical or the demographic data. This is an example of the representation of percentage increase in population of 65 years, that is 1993 to 2020, and these are the different states in which the population has risen, and this is the key to the statistical map. This is an example of the total black population over 65 years, 1991, the data belongs to 1991, and again this is the key according to which you can comprehend this statistical map, that in which state what was the population. Let's talk about the next type of graph, that is histogram graph. A histogram displays continuous data in ordered columns. Categories are of continuous measures such as the time, inches, temperature, etc. You must have noticed that till here in the pie diagram as well as the bar diagram, we were representing only the discrete data. So now histograms are helpful in representing the continuous data. It is a graph showing the differences in the frequencies or percentage among categories of an interval ratio variable. The categories are displayed as the continuous bars with width which is proportional to the width of the category and the height to the frequency or the percentage of that very category. This is an example of a histograph. So here this is the class interval and this is the corresponding frequency given according to each class interval. So here you see that unlike the bar graph, there is no gap between the rectangles. So therefore, this particular histograph can be used to display graphically the continuous data. So let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of a histogram. Again, it is very visually strong and appealing. Secondly, can compare to the normal curve. So going back here, it is very easy to draw a normal curve with the help of a histograph. Usually, vertical axis is the frequency count of the items falling into each category. So therefore, according to each class interval, the frequency would be given there, and then you will be able to comprehend that in which particular class interval, how much is the frequency. It also suffers with certain disadvantages. Cannot read exact values because data is grouped into categories. That's a drawback of the continuous series representation in a tabular form as well. Then more difficult to compare two data sets, and lastly, use only with the continuous data. So therefore, it would become very difficult for us in order to represent a discrete series with the help of a histogram. So next is the frequency polygon. Once you have made a histogram, it is easier for you to make a frequency polygon. A frequency polygon can be made from a line graph by shading the area beneath the graph. It can be made from a histogram by joining the midpoints of each of the columns. So this is by joining the midpoints of each column of the histogram, it is easier for you to make a frequency polygon. So a frequency polygon, if we explain further, it is a graph showing the differences in frequencies or percentages among categories of the interval ratio variable. Points representing the frequencies of each category and placed above the midpoint of the category and are joined with a straight line curve. So this is again an example of the frequency polygon. You can see this is also a time series graph that we are going to discuss. So therefore, these line graphs help you to compare the data. If you see, the key is here, and to each color corresponds a particular year. This is again a frequency polygon wherein you have given the class intervals as well as the corresponding frequency. After forming or after drawing the histogram, join the midpoints of each of the rectangles and get a frequency polygon. Advantages: the first advantage is that it becomes very visually appealing, and secondly, it also suffers with certain disadvantages like the anchors at both ends may imply as the zero data points. So here also you can see that these anchors at the end, we can say that these are representing the zero data points, which is not a fact, and use only with the continuous data. So therefore, you cannot use a frequency polygon with the help of a discrete data. Next is the time series charts, a graph displaying the changes in the variables over a period of time. So therefore, when you have on the x-axis certain periods of time and on the y-axis the behavior of the variable, when you plot it according to the time, the behavior of the variable gets plotted on that particular graph. This graph is known as a time series graph. So here you can see these are the years, and according to the years the plotting has been done. Just by looking at the time series graph, you can find out that what is the behavior of that variable over a period of time. Statistics in practice. So therefore, the following graphs are particularly suitable for making comparisons amongst the groups. So this is just a statistical trivia for you. So therefore, whenever you are wanting to simply represent the data, the most simplest form of graphs that can be used is the bar chart, the frequency polygon, as well as the time series chart. So this was our presentation on the graphical representation of data. Hope you liked it. Thank you so very much. Stay tuned for more.